Paradoxes are great. I always loved them. Not the commonplace type. That a very nice person can suddenly turn into a dickhead. That pain can be pleasurable. That peacefulness can lead to war. No, the kind of paradox that philosophers obsess over in the dingy offices between classes. No brain teasers or intellectual sleights of hand, but the examination of essential questions. A paradox is an apparent unacceptable conclusion that is derived by apparently acceptable reasoning from apparently acceptable premises. Certain areas of philosophy invite paradoxes on a regular basis, so they are somewhat expected. Think for example about moral philosophy. Every moral philosopher worth his or her salt will try to construct thought experiments that show the absurdity of certain actions. But when it comes to rational decisions, it seems there shouldn't be a similar problem. No one can act rationally all the time. However, under ideal conditions, with enough time for deliberation, one should be able to make a rational decision that more often than not will result in the best outcome. Spoiler alert. One very famous example is
The Prisoner's Dilemma.
Prisoner's Dilemma.
Vous connaissez sûrement le dilemme du prisonnier.
Prisoner's Dilemma game.
Well, it's actually called the prisoner's paradox. But that's okay. Two people, let's just call them Jimmy and Johnny, are charged with a crime and are separately being grilled by police. They are both presented with the same two options. You can cooperate with your alleged partner in crime and keep silent, or you talk to the police. The penalty depends on the action of your alleged partner in crime. If Jimmy confesses and Johnny keeps quiet, Jimmy goes free and Johnny will go to the big house for the next 10 years. If Jimmy confesses and so does Johnny, both will be bunkmates for the next 5 years. If they both keep quiet, they can only be convicted for a minor crime and will spend 1 year in prison. If Johnny confesses and Jimmy doesn't, it's Jimmy that has to watch his back for the next 10 years. So, we have two players, two possible options for action, cooperation and non-cooperation, with each other, not with the police, and the possible outcomes are in such a relation that the worst outcome for one player is the best outcome for the other player. How should Jimmy and Johnny act in this scenario, and where does the paradox present itself? Jimmy might argue like this. My opponent will either confess or not confess. If he confesses, it will be better for me to confess as well. 5 years are preferable to 10. If he does not confess, it will be better for me to confess anyway. 0 years are preferable to 1. Therefore, it is better for me to confess, regardless of what my opponent is doing. Johnny, of course, is in the same situation and should arrive at the same conclusion. It is a neat argument. It's logically sound, an actual dilemma, and employs the dominance principle. An action is dominant versus another action when its consequences are preferred to the consequences of the other action. Both Jimmy and Johnny do have a dominant strategy.
Confess.
So where is the paradox? Well, if both players act rationally, they will end up with a pretty lousy outcome. They would have fared better had they acted irrationally and trusted the other guy. In this graph, A is the most preferred option. D is the least preferred option. Jimmy really wants Johnny to cooperate while he himself is defecting. Johnny wants the opposite. Cooperation leads to the second best outcome for both. Non-cooperation to the second worst. Or to put it more generally, rational action is aimed to maximize utility, a fancy way of referring to any outcome you want to achieve. Rational action may lead to less utility because of its rationality. Therefore, sometimes it is rational to be irrational. What? Yeah, I tried the last one on my wife. It doesn't work. You can tackle a paradox by either refuting the premises, the validity of the inference, or to accept the conclusion. In this case, let us focus on the premises and the conclusion. In these last minutes, Johnny has become increasingly upset. Our little dilemma, he complains, ignores morality completely. One prominent moral demand brought forward by Peter Singer demands neutrality. Just because an interest is attached to me, that doesn't make it any more important than a similar interest by another person. No one gets special privileges. Johnny is in fact convinced that morality and rationality go hand in hand. Let's consider another choice. Would you like to live in a world that is ruled by moral laws, or a world that is completely void of any morals? If you don't have a post-apocalyptic fetish, you will clearly opt for the first world. Here, you will pay a small fine so that you can do the right and rational thing and cooperate. Johnny's line of reasoning, however, has not been thought through. It only provides two options: moral in a moral world and amoral in an amoral world. It omits the rational choice, amoral in a moral world, where you enjoy all the advantages without the costs. In the end, another prisoner's paradox emerges, one made up of as many participants as society has members. Accepting an apparently unacceptable conclusion is kind of a last resort. Nevertheless, in this case, it is an option. Rational action doesn't necessarily lead to the best result. Suppose you had to choose to share a room for half an hour with either a rattlesnake or a lion. You are rational and choose the snake, since its venom probably won't kill you so soon. After 30 minutes and several snake bites, you find out that the lion would have been asleep the whole time. Does the rationality of your decision change? Obviously not. In the prisoner's paradox, rationality itself leads to doom, but only because there is an information gap that exacerbates the conflict between individual and collective interests. Deeper knowledge about your co-prisoner would make the decision easier. Johnny is being presented with a choice again. A prophet, someone who accurately predicted his choices until now, is offering him two boxes, box A and box B. He can open both boxes or only box B, and whatever he finds in there, he is allowed to keep. Now, box A will always contain $1,000. Box B, however, will contain
$1 million.
If and only if the prophet had prophesied that only box B would be open. Otherwise, it will remain empty. Johnny just finished his 10-year term after getting suckered in the prisoner's dilemma. So now he will be as rational and calculating as he can. So first of all, he searches for a dominant strategy and finds one right away. If he chooses A and B, then he will end up with $1 million if box A remains empty, and $1,001,000 if it is not. If he chooses only box B, he will lose $1 million in the first case, and $1,000 in the second case. Johnny confidently opens both boxes and finds $1,000. That won't help him much, now that he has no home or future. To add insult to injury, Jimmy comes along, driving an expensive-looking car. You see, when I had just been released from prison, some guy calling himself Prophet offered me 2 boxes. I opened up one and was a millionaire, and started my own crypto empire. But why only 1 box? Johnny asks. Very simple math. I figured that if the guy wasn't a time traveler or omniscient god, he would be able to predict my actions maybe around 90% of the time. So if I chose box B alone, there would be a 90% chance to end up with $1 million and a 10% chance of ending up with nothing. The expected value would thusly be 0.9 times 1 million or $900,000. If I had chosen both boxes, it would have been a 90% chance of ending up with $1,000 and a 10% chance of ending up with $1,001,000. The expected value in this case would have been $101,000. It's pretty obvious actually, as long as the guy's predictions are better than 50-50. Johnny is getting visibly upset now. You fool! There would have been money in the other box, and you wasted it for trying to cooperate with some weirdo. Maybe. But, you know, as a very rich man, it doesn't bother me to throw away a little. In my position, some degree of eccentricity is, after all, expected. Newcomb's paradox can be described as a special case of the prisoner's dilemma. We have 2 players that try to maximize their utility. Cooperation yields good outcomes, but only non-cooperation can lead to the individual best outcome. Johnny is correct in pointing out the dominant strategy. But Jimmy makes a good point as well, referencing the principle of expected utility. It's a very easy principle. You just factor in the size of an expected payoff and the probability to get it. A jackpot of $1,000 and a winning probability of 1 in 1,000, for example, wouldn't be worth more than $1. Both principles make perfect sense, but you can only choose one. So it's less about ending up with a lousy outcome by being rational, and more about making up your mind what the rational thing to do even is. There are good people on both sides for whom the solution is bloody obvious. Say, an outside observer can see through the glass bottom of box A and can't believe that someone wouldn't take it. It's not going away after being put there after all. Another observer, maybe someone working in a betting office, just crunches the numbers and sees that nearly every one boxer is now a millionaire, and nearly every two boxer is pretty pissed off. Trying to refute the premises in the Newcomb paradox, we would start with the prophet. If the bar for this entity were set so high that he would need to have a 100% success rate, one could simply exclaim, "There are no prophets." For absolute certainty, the prophet would need the ability to travel in time, omniscience, or the ability to manipulate the choice of the player. The first two attributes might offer logical problems. The third one would eliminate choice altogether. But the prophet isn't described in these terms. He only needs to make predictions that are better than 50-50. That's not far-fetched, and certainly not a logical impossibility. He can analyze every Newcomb game ever played, look at the personality types of the 1 and 2 boxers, the prior choices of the players, and so on. Maybe it turns out that some people are predispositioned to choose one box and others to choose both boxes. If you are a 2-boxer, it is idiotic to fight your natural tendency because that won't change the 2-boxer perception of you. You would need to stick to the dominance principle and open both boxes. Unfortunately, your rational choice, as in the prisoner's paradox, will lead again to a crappy outcome.
Some paradoxes can be trivial. Some paradoxes don't change how we view the world.
Prisoners and Newcomb's paradox are different. We think of rational choice as a means to exert control over our world. This perception is shattered when rational action inevitably leads to worse outcomes, when one's past psychological state limits the possible payoff in the present, and when one sits before box B in desperation, terrified that the content may vanish into thin air. Wait a minute. A natural 1-boxer would also cooperate in the prisoner's paradox, right? That's exactly what I did. I even went against my better moral judgment in the Newcomb case. Why am I broke and not you? What did your prophet look like?